Chapter 371, inculcated teaching. As the saying goes, while those involved were clueless, onlookers would often see things with great clarity. Even though the man that had found himself sprawled on the ground had no idea what had just happened, everybody who had been watching the fight, including OS and the other non-martial practitioners, had seen everything very clearly. However, all they saw was Gufei quickly tripping his opponent up, while the martial experts among them could tell the profundity within that one step Gufei had taken. It was like he had perfectly calculated where that man would be stepping, so he preemptively placed his own leg over. Doing so made it look as if that one step his opponent had taken was sent right to where Gufei's foot was in the first place. "Your J-chain step is far too precise," Gufei calmly told that man on the ground. That man instantly understood what had happened. Gufei could already discern his use of a J-chain step that sequenced into a Yuan-Yang kick on just his third step, which only resulted in Gufei reading into where his fourth step would land thanks to his obstinate execution of his moves, an exact recreation of the sequence learned. It was only natural that the more precise that step of his was, the more deadly it became, allowing Gufei to capitalize on this one mistake with ease. His HP did not drop by much with that fall, but the exchange of blows between the two had already transcended the life or death struggle in the game, and was now a proper kung fu sparring. This man shared the same thought as the person before. Had this been real life, now that I've been swept down like this with my opponent before me, given the skill he demonstrated, he could easily end my life with a swift stomp to my head. This is my loss. That man got up to his feet and stared blankly at Gufei, backing off without saying another word. None of these men would dare call themselves an expert, if they were unable to tell just how powerful and skilled Gufei was at this point. The man before them was without a doubt a martial practitioner like themselves. Anyone could tell that both parties were no longer in the same realm just from the few kung fu jargon Gufei had casually dropped, and the look of confusion the rest showed when they heard him. The remaining three men exchanged looks with one another for a while, before glancing over to the two others who had been defeated. Just like how OS had nodded to his men, these five all tacitly nodded and the three men walked out as well. But they showed a serious attitude about them, as the three had their fists cupped to salute Gufei before saying, "Please advise. Please advise." Gufei returned the salute with courtesy as the three rushed at him, surrounding him in a triangular formation as they circled around him slowly, searching for a good opportunity to strike. Although Gufei had been surrounded by the three men, he remained as calm and composed as ever, a demeanor that betrayed no emotions. He was the same kind as those men from the Eternal War mercenary group, and it was clear he was of much higher caliber than them. If these people were considered gangsters, then he was the mobster. If these people were from a martial arts hall, then he must be the martial arts hall master. If these people were ex-military, then Gufei was essentially the super soldier that thought of retiring, but truly had no desire to. While everyone was lost in their own thoughts, the three men suddenly roared while they were circling and were now rushing towards Gufei, fists raised and kicks out. That warrior had even thrust out with his claymore. Gufei was smiling with immense confidence, taking 2 steps diagonally back before turning. In that moment, the three suddenly realized their target was no longer in front of them, and that warrior had used his charge skill in this initial rush, so he had no choice but to cancel his skill when saw that his claymore was about to plunge into his comrade. In fact, he was worried that it might be too late, so he even did all he could to raise it above his head. The sword ended up brushing inches away from his comrade's eye, causing that man to break out in cold sweat and fright. Gufei slowly commented from behind them, "You there holding the sword, you must be a novice." That warrior's mouth immediately went wide, not knowing what to say, as if he was a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. It's rather complicated to pull off a flight of the 3 paths with 3 men in coordination. How would a novice like him be able to pull it off with you guys? Gufei turned his head back to lecture the other 2 men before turning back to the warrior. "The two over there have a very firm foundation when it comes to kung fu, so much so that they are inflexible in their ways. You're better, but that's essentially because you're all over the place. Did you think you would be more powerful if you used the game's charge skill? Do you know that you became the flaw that spoiled everything? Do you even know that you made a misstep while you were circling me with Plum Blossom Step? Then you continuously made the mistake for 17 steps before you used that charge. How in the world would you even hit me? That warrior was frozen in place hearing Gu Fei berate him, his head drooping lower and lower. When Gu Fei saw that he was finally aware of his mistake, he turned back to the other two and began, "His standard is entirely at a different level from both of you. How was he going to coordinate flight of the three paths? Why didn't you two try the movement of the two paths instead?" "Movement of the two paths? We haven't learned that yet?" The two sheepishly answered. "You've already begun to practice flight of the three paths before even learning movement of the two paths?" Gu Fei's eyes widened in incredulity. The two blushed beet red as they replied, "Actually, we haven't really practiced it. We had been looking at the manual and saw that it looked interesting. We tried running through it in private and occasionally tried to use it in game." "Oh, then it's not easy that you've gotten to this level. Still, it's better if you go back and practice movement of the two paths first, otherwise there's no way you can improve your flight of the three paths." Gu Fei lectured them. "There are some things that must be taken step by step. Skipping a step forcefully like this would just end up like your bro over there, a misstep from his plum blossom step that cascaded into 18 wrong steps." That warrior had just lifted his head when he saw Gu Fei was no longer chastising him, but now that he was unexpectedly mentioned once more, his head drooped down quickly even as he muttered almost inaudibly, "Didn't you say it was 17 steps just now?" Unexpectedly, Gu Fei had really keen hearing as he instantly picked up his words. He angrily blasted back, "Isn't it 18 steps if we count the first misstep?" Hearing back, "Despite knowing you're in the wrong, I would have slayed you on the spot had it not been for the fact that you guys are just beginners. You better head back and work on your foundations before you come out and use Kung Fu again." That warrior turned submissive, not daring to make another noise. Gu Fei looked from one man to another, the five not speaking a word to him. Gu Fei had no choice but to stare at these five together as he asked, "What else do you want to be advised on?" It was as if the five were roused from a dream when they heard this, before remembering what they were here for. They had unexpectedly been soundly beaten by Gu Fei and no longer had any doubts about him. Not only was this man abnormally skilled, his knowledge was also far beyond theirs, and was possibly someone of immense background. The five instantly replied when they realized this, "Not at the moment. We'll come back for more next time." With that, the five men had already turned to flee, much like those people who were often picked on and slayed. But the fact was that the HP of these five men were still very full. How much damage could Gu Fei's barehanded attacks do, anyway? Besides, Gu Fei had not even touched the final three players. They were running away after Gu Fei dodged out of their encirclement and lectured them on their poor execution. This was truly a fight that was satisfying to watch. Where are you guys going? When are you coming back? Remember to bring more experts over." Gu Fei was still shouting after those five men as they ran. It was uncertain if the men heard his words. They had beaten a retreat very quickly. After all, Gu Fei turned back to find all the players from Yunjuan City staring at him intently. "They've all run off," Gu Fei regretfully explained as he sighed. "Was everything that you did Kung Fu?" It was obvious that no one was concerned over the issue of them running off, but they were all captivated by the sudden realization that if they really wished to be even more powerful in Parallel World, there was another method beyond just overpowered equipment or grinding levels and skills. Plus, this method was extremely formidable, enough that it could make Gu Fei seem like a peerless superhuman. "Does that guy really know some bullshit Kung Fu?" Young Master Han muttered to himself. Actually, those most familiar with Gu Fei already knew he was unique, even though Gu Fei had always been saying he was a Kung Fu expert. It was just that in this time period, Kung Fu had already been relegated to the point of obscurity, and no one really had the chance to experience what Kung Fu was in real life. Most of what they understood of martial arts came from all the different literature and movies, or the showy wushu performances. Everybody knew that those movies and novels were fake, and those performance sorts were essentially no better than gymnastics. The average person would find it strange to witness the sort of Kung Fu that could actually be applied to real combat like this. Now that they had personally experienced this miracle, none of them wished to miss this opportunity, as in that strange moment of silence, plenty of players suddenly dashed aggressively towards Gu Fei and dove before him, each waving their hands as they yelled, "Miles bro, teach me, teach me." Such a scene was originally something that Gu Fei would be extremely happy to see, but he was well aware why these people were showing the sudden enthusiasm. They would be entirely mistaken if they thought any martial practitioner would impart their kung fu without asking for the reason. After all, this was a skill that could allow people to injure or even kill others, so reasons like self-defense or health would be for self-consolation. Any form of self-defense would be based on attacking your opponent. Kung Fu was all about aggression, after all. So even though Gu Fei usually wished everybody practiced Kung Fu, if there was anyone who sought to learn from him, he actually made sure to fully grasp the potential student's intentions and take note of his conduct. Take Coward's Savior, for example. Even though he had been mixed around with a bad gang in Y City, Gu Fei could easily tell that he was a simple soul and was definitely not a bad person. He was at ease teaching Kung Fu to such a person, which was why he took care to teach him the 7-star Mantis Fist style. Reality proved that Gu Fei was not wrong, either. Coward Savior was originally someone with a bit of foundation, so with Gu Fei's coaching, the strength he possessed was not something the average player could handle. Nevertheless, that man remained as happy-go-lucky and simple as he always was, never once using what he learned to bully others, not even having the wish to purposely search for unfairness to try out his newfound skills. Not even Gu Fei was at that level himself, for he would not have sought out for parallel world in the first place if he had reached such a realm of enlightenment. Presently, each and everyone here was looking to Gu Fei with sincere expressions for his tutelage after discovering the secret to Gu Fei's indomitable strength. But who knew what these people would do if they were to learn it? There was no way Gu Fei would casually teach anyone without finding this out. But seeing that everybody was so passionate at this moment, Gu Fei could tell in a glance that there might not even be any chance to explain the matter, so all he could do was take a break from all this as he blinked to extend the distance between him and the rest of the people, turning to flee. Chapter 372, Certification. Gu Fei did not dawdle as he ran off, the decisiveness in fleeing apparent through his actions alone. After all, this was a question that martial art families had long pondered over. The decline of Kung Fu was clearly related to their strict criteria when choosing potential disciples. It could be said that it was far more difficult to find a disciple than a teacher simply from the fact that it was pointless if the person was unable to shoulder the responsibility of protecting world peace. Nor was there any discernible benefits for day-to-day life as well as the higher requirements expected of potential disciples. Despite this, the Gu family Gu Fei hailed from never once wavered from this principle. It was their staunch belief that Kung Fu should be used to cultivate an Ultraman, and it should never be used to create a monster. Considering how many people disdained practicing martial arts within his own family, what more could be said about outsiders? As Gu Fei thought about these matters, he could not help but feel a wave of sadness overcome him. When those players from Yunjuan City saw how determined Gu Fei was to flee, plenty of them quickly gave up chasing him. It was clear the message he was sending by running off like that. There was no point in giving chase if he had no wish to impart his skills. Quite a few of them revealed their displeasure at this, thinking Gu Fei was being far too arrogant playing this game. He had already been such a strong entity for so long. He should contribute his methods to the public so everyone could become strong together. But since Gu Fei appeared to be unwilling, the rest had no choice either, and all they could do was wallow in their anger deep down. But more to the point was the fact that even if they gave chase, a large portion of them did not even have the movement speed necessary to catch up to him. But out of all these people, there was indeed someone whose movement speed clearly outstripped that of Gu Fei. This person did not give up, continuing the chase with rugged determination. This person's speed was so formidable, that Gu Fei did not even need to turn around to look. Just from the footsteps alone, he was able to recognize who this person was. There was only one person that Gu Fei knew that could so easily catch up to him, Svelte Dancer. A quick glance confirmed this red figure to be her. Gu Fei had already lost count how many times he had seen this figure of hers fiercely plunging into clouds without any restraint, causing bursts of white light to follow moments after. Never would he have guessed there would be a day when this person would be chasing after him. But if it is this woman who wishes to learn, Gu Fei considered this and felt that Svelte Dancer's character was not particularly bad. Aside from being a little overbearing and her habit of insta-killing people regularly. Teach her Kung Fu? Gu Fei could not decide at this moment. Honestly speaking, Gufei did not have much experience when it came to accepting disciples. According to the rules, he would have to obtain the approval of his own master before he could open his own martial hall. Gufei's master was, of course, his father, but he had never given him this right. It was fine for him to casually give a few pointers to Coward's savior, but Gufei was not yet certified to take in disciples like a real master. Dancer had already rushed up to Gufei in the time it took for him to think about all this, and before Gufei could even say a word, she had already verbally lashed out at him. "Oi, I never thought you were the petty sort." Gufei's train of thought stopped abruptly as he quickly registered what she said, smiling bitterly. "You don't understand." "What don't I understand?" "You shouldn't be like this. Gotta share it with everyone if you've got something fun to play." "To think you actually fled in fright, that's just so unsightly." "This is so unlike you," Dancer said. Gufei could not hold back and asked, "So what exactly am I like?" This." Dancer was evasive, thinking for the longest time before realizing she actually was not particularly well acquainted with Gufei, finally saying angrily, "Don't run even if you're unwilling to teach them. Just kill them all." Gufei was speechless. Dancer was extremely pleased with herself. "So, at a loss for words, eh? That's why I'm saying, how could you act like that? I told you, you don't understand." Gufei sighed as he turned to gaze over at the crowd. It looked as if no one else had continued to stubbornly give chase like Dancer did. Not one of them did. Even though Gufei had already stopped running now that Dancer had caught up to him, the other players from Yunjuan City still remained where they were, not a single one making their way over. At most some of them were looking over in their direction. Gufei was not omniscient, so he did not know that even though none of them had run over, the topic of discussion was still about him. "Ah, Dancer caught up with that youngster," someone sighed in awe. "With her speed, I doubt there is anyone at that could compete with her. Looks like he even 1,000 miles drunk is no match, either." 1,000 miles drunk has stopped too. The two of them seem to be talking. Wonder what are they talking about? When someone raised this question, many of them instantly thought of the answer. Everybody had only one reason for chasing after Gufei, and Dancer was no exception. Whenever Dancer wanted something, unless it was something non-existent in the game, there was nothing that she would not have trouble obtaining, since she had really deep pockets. With that thought in mind, plenty of them began to regret their actions. They regretted not realizing the situation at hand from the start, actually pursuing Gufei for his tutelage so nakedly. They should have cried out their bids upon approaching him. But now the deed was done. With Dancer taking the starting bid, how would anyone else be able to match the price she set? The average person would often have the misconception that rich people were all unscrupulous. Anything that could be ordinarily be bought with $500 would surely become $1,000 in order to flaunt the fact that they were a rich person. But the reality was far from this. The actual reality right now was that Dancer had not even mentioned money when talking to Gufei. After Gufei elaborated further about the problem with imparting martial arts to people, Dancer was confused by all this, blankly saying once he finished, "Is there a need to complicate things like that? Of course. There's fewer and fewer people learning Kung Fu largely due to all the restraints that exist," Gufei said. "Just ignore them." Dancer said. "That's even worse. The more profound the knowledge is, the greater the necessity for these limitations," Gufei said. "Stop blowing your own trumpet." Dancer was discontented. Gufei laughed, yet Dancer seemed to have thought of something as she suddenly asked, "Do you think I'm qualified?" Gufei was stunned. From Dancer's words and actions, Gufei knew that this lady originally held no intentions when she first approached him. After all, she already possessed the strength to dominate most of the players in Parallel World. Even Gufei found this woman's speed and reaction time difficult to deal with. When she asked this question at this point of time, Gufei knew that she was probably asking for the heck of it, not really seriously considering the notion in the least. "Well, that." Gufei hemmed and hawed. "What are you trying to say?" Dancer pressed him as her eyes sharpened. "You're fine. You're fine," Gufei vaguely answered. He had no choice but to say this, because when talking to Dancer about his struggles with taking in disciples, he mentioned that the thing he placed the greatest importance on was the person's character, not caring for the qualification, talent, or even the physical fitness of the person in question. Thus, if Gufei were to say Svelte dancer do not qualify, it was as good as saying her character was problematic. Seeing how she was, Gufei would likely have to risk his life if he really said that. Indeed, Svelte dancer nodded her head when she got this answer, even commending Gufei as she said, "In that case, this lady here will allow you to teach me a few things." "Sorry, but I don't have the proper qualifications to take in my own disciples yet," Gufei chuckled. As expected, Svelte dancer really took up the chance when offered, but Gufei had already prepared for this, lightly rebuffing Svelte dancer with a convenient excuse. "Ha, you wish." Svelte dancer said, "Did I say I would take you as my master? All I'm saying is that you can casually give me a few tips and tricks to entertain me. In that case, I'll have to think about it." "I'll teach you something suitable for you once I think of something," Gufei said. "That's more like it." Svelte dancer was finally satisfied. "Alright, head on back first," Gufei said. "What about you?" Svelte dancer asked. I think I'll wait till they've calmed down a bit before saying a few words. Otherwise I'll follow them from a distance like this, lending a hand if anything crops up," Gufei said. "I'll try and explain the matter for you when I get back," Svelte dancer said. That's not bad, too." With that, Svelte dancer returned to the main body, attracting quite a commotion from the rest of players. Svelte dancer's back. When she got closer, the sharpshooters among them had already noticed that Svelte dancer looked to be elated as she made her way back. She got it. Everyone thought this as they stared at Svelte dancer. Many of them could hardly hold themselves back, as they recited the sentence they had readied in their minds over and over again. Even the guild leader of Traversing Four Seas, Oathless Sword, was no exception. He licked his dry lips, thinking that no matter how high the price Svelte dancers had negotiated, he was sure to be able to afford it with the backing of his whole guild. How wonderful it would be if he was able to share it with the rest of the comrades in his guild after he learned it himself. With such an optimistic thought in his mind, Oathless Sword was just about to step forward and ask Svelte dancer about the matter when young Master Han stepped right before him. "Guild leader Oathless, are we still doing this quest or not?" young Master Han asked icily. "Ah, quest." Oathless Sword was immediately reminded of the matter at hand. Those 5 men that had been blocking their way left, but they had yet to make a move after all this time. They should have been seizing every second they had to quickly send Todd into the prison. The faster they did that, the less problems they would meet. Oathless Sword quickly gave out his orders to everyone. "What are we all standing around idly for? Let's hurry and carry on the journey." The company began to move, and Svelte dancer had already melted into the crowd, returning back into the circle of ladies from Amethyst Rebirth. A player sneakily made his way over to immediately, nodding his head with a slight bow. "Lady Svelte." "What?" Svelte dancer glared. "That, how did it go with 1,000 Miles Drunk?" that person asked, as the rest of them stood by the side listening in. "What do you mean, how did it go?" "Of course I'm talking about that 1,000 Miles Drunk's Kung Fu. How much did it cost to get him to teach you?" "Cost?" Svelte dancer angrily replied, "Is Kung Fu something you use money to obtain? Let me tell you guys something, if you wish to learn Kung Fu, you gotta first think about your character. Anyone who conducts himself or herself poorly can forget about it. This is a craft for that man. The first thing that he attaches importance to is your virtue. Money, money, money. All you think about is money. Just from that thought of yours alone, I think you're already disqualified." Chapter 373, Treating the Trees as Enemies. Svelte dancer glared at that man with her arms by her side, lecturing him properly. When another player came up hoping to ask something after that man retreated, Svelte dancer treated his intention as misconduct that determined the person's poor character and directly deprived him of his right to learn Kung Fu for life. At the moment, it seemed like anyone who came forward looking to learn Kung Fu was bound to be someone with a poor character, making it seem she was the only one who qualified. Pretty soon, no one dared to step forward and ask Svelte dancer anything, and the fact quickly spread among almost every member of the company. Players who had been snubbed by Svelte dancer snappily lashed out to anyone who looked to ask about the matter as well, instantly castigating them. "Learn Kung Fu? You wish to learn Kung Fu with the sort of character you got? Did you even pass your ideology and morals classes during your primary school days? That last bit really left everybody confused. Morality was a very vague concept in truth, so how could there be a measure for it? If it went by laws and regulations, then almost everyone was law-abiding citizen. But occasionally spitting on the street, or feigning being asleep when an old lady got on board a bus, even immoral thoughts when someone caught sight of a beautiful woman, would such acts be considered having a poor character? Everyone gave the matter a good think, reviewing the life they had led, and everyone found that there was always something immoral that tainted it, causing everyone to bemoan their fate. It's over. I don't have the qualities to learn Kung Fu. The whole group of players from Yunjuan City slowly made their way onward with great introspection. Gu Fei, in the meantime, was doing exactly what he had told Svelte Dancer, maintaining a good distance from the main body as he walked alone. The landscape and scenery in Lori City was entirely different from the other capital cities. There was still an abundance of greenery when they were back at the pier, but as they walked further inland, the flowers looked more wilted, while the grass yellowed. Even the trees looked withered, and large patches of grayish-yellow rocks could be seen more frequently. The distinct style and palette of the location they were in allowed them all to realize that they had more or less stepped into the territory of Lori City. The landscape was akin to a desert, yet not, arid like the Gobi, yet not, looking entirely strange and nondescript. The only advantage was the openness afforded by this landscape. A single glance and any player could make out the city in the distance. A dried-up river was not too far away from where they were, meandering towards Lori City. Fuck! Someone remarked loudly. We were on an island surrounded by water mere moments ago, yet we now find ourselves in an arid plain in the blink of an eye. The system's really too much. Stay alert, everyone. We'll talk about the rest when the quest ends, Oathless Sword exhorted them, stifling any further discussion. He was worried everyone would forget they were still on a quest if their attention was diverted to the conversation. Everyone nodded their heads and got back to the task at hand. Even the mercenary members who were not after the reward at the end of the mission were at least hoping to safeguard their own lives, so everyone was more or less working towards the same goal here. Take note of your surroundings. With that, Oathless Sword quickly called on several sharpshooters to use their eagle eye to do reconnaissance. The sharpshooters began to sweep all around, but the end result left much to be desired. It was mainly because these players did not recognize who their potential assailants were, so they had no idea who were the ones out there really grinding, and who were the ones pretending until their targets came into view. Finally, those sharpshooters had no choice but to report to Oathless Sword that they were unsure of any movement. Oathless Sword gazed out towards the small packs of players all around them on the map and furrowed his brow. To him, all those players could very well be enemies. Those people could ignore them if they rushed forward, but it would be very bad if they waited until the core group passed them before they gathered their forces and surrounded them. So despite seeing the very common sight of players grinding before them, Oathless Sword did not dare call his troop to advance. Let's kill them as we go along. Who cares what they are really doing? Let's kill them all indiscriminately. We won't have to worry about where these people originate from. Someone said to Oathless Sword. Are you trying to rile up the whole of Lori City to stop us from completing our quest? Oathless Sword barked. It was fine to kill a handful of players without making their intentions clear, but to start a massacre across the grinding map at such a large scale would surely draw the ire of everyone. By the time they arrived at the city, they would most likely be crushed like ants once everybody picked up that limitless competitive quest in retaliation. Oathless Sword could not decide at the moment, so the expedition army naturally came to a halt. Oathless Sword let loose a heavy sigh and waved, "Let's rest here." All the mercenary leaders make their way over for a meeting. "Goddamn, why are we having another meeting?" one of the mercenary leaders moaned. This entire journey did not have much fighting, but there had been plenty of meetings which were bothersome to no end. Gu Fei, who was a few hundred meters away from the main body, did not really inquire about what happened when the company of men came to an abrupt stop. Seeing that this was a grinding spot, he was far more carefree being by himself, casually grinding on the monsters as he waited for the expedition to resume. The mercenary leader meeting for this expedition had begun with great exuberance and intensity. At the same time, somewhere behind where the Yunjuan City players had halted their troops, 7 men were huddled behind a huge rocky outcrop that had been battered by the sun and wind. "Why have they stopped?" Someone whispered. "What are you whispering for? There's no way they can hear us with how far away we are, right?" Someone beside that person said. "We might as well converse over a private channel if we're whispering," another added. "All right, shut it with your nonsense," Southern Lone Blade finally said. Even though they had departed a little after the departure of the players from Yunjuan City, the wooden little boats they took were about as fast as the ship, and with how they were able to control the speed of the craft themselves, the little boats could nationally move much faster than the system-operated ferry if they rowed harder. However, they did not disembark anywhere near the designated pier, but had instead forcefully come ashore from another shore, all 7 of them hurrying onwards until they caught up to the expedition. At the moment they were all hiding behind the outcrop, observing the situation. Except they were not at all concerned with TF's quest, as they only had a single target in mind, Gufei. Or to be precisely, Gufei was not really their target, but rather the equipment he had on. "We won't have a chance to strike at this rate. Looks like we may have jumped the gun a little," someone mumbled. Southern Lone Blade did not seem to have heard this as he turned his head to the other person beside him. "Glue, do your best to find out what are they doing." The player called Glue was the archer of this 7-man group. The reason Southern Lone Blade had directed him to do the task showed that this person was someone who had advanced to a sharpshooter and possessed Eagle Eye. There were several hundred players from Yunjuan City present. Aside from those mercenary leaders and a few key members of TFS discussing the matter at hand, the rest of them had nothing to do, so there was not much to go on to decipher what they were doing. Glue stared for quite a while before shaking his head. "I don't know what they are doing. It looks like they are resting." Resting? It was not as if they had just been ambushed by a large assault. Why would they stop for a rest without any rhyme or reason? Southern Lone Blade was quick-witted and soon guessed that they must surely be afraid of meeting some sort of problem up ahead, resulting in the need for a discussion. Just what sort of trouble could they have met? Southern Lone Blade looked all around, and all he saw were the scattered players grinding monsters everywhere. Southern Lone Blade kept looking and immediately realized, the biggest problem these players from Yunjuan City now faced was their inability to discern friend or foe. As long as the enemy did not take the initiative to reveal themselves, they would have no idea who they should be attacking or staying their hand. Any one of these people could be an enemy or someone unaffiliated. It was thanks to such thoughts that they had no idea if they should continue onwards. "Oh, that's truly quite a quandary they have found themselves in." Southern Lone Blade could not help but ponder upon this problem, as well. What should we do? At the moment, all the leaders along on this expedition had these 4 words upon their lips and in their minds. "Hey!" At this time, Luo had sent a message to young Master Han. "Do you have an idea or something? Just speak up already." From the start of this meeting, quite a few had contributed their suggestions, but it had all been rejected due to the plan's flimsiness. Yet, young Master Han had not spoken a word throughout this entire process. Luo had experienced the cunning of young Master Han, and did not believe that he would not have a single idea to resolve this matter. Oathless Sword was also looking expectantly at young Master Han. He was the only one that had yet to say a thing, incidentally becoming the final miracle grass for Oathless Sword. Ahem! Young Master Han coughed lightly. Oathless Sword immediately was beside himself with joy. "Does Brother Han have a suggestion?" "Ahem! I think that facing such a situation, the best solution is to disperse ourselves," young Master Han said. "Disperse ourselves?" Oathless Sword repeated what he had said, already wondering what sort of advantage this method would bring. The others were also trying to make sense of this proposition. "Since we have no idea what the enemy is going to do, and we're even unsure who our potential enemies are, for that matter, let us split up and perhaps that will lure the enemy into acting. We'll adapt according to the situation," young Master Han said. "We are already numerically disadvantaged going up against a limitless competitive mission. Aren't we placing ourselves in serious danger if we split ourselves up even further?" someone asked. "Hey, even though there might be plenty of players participating in this mission, they are each working together within their own groups. It's impossible for them to be working as a whole unit. Everyone seated here are leaders of our own mercenary groups. I doubt there's a need for me to elaborate on this." Everyone was silent. Indeed, there was a need for groups to cooperate if they were to pick up such a mission, but this cooperation was an avenue of study in itself. First, It depended on the difficulty of the mission. Their combined strength should at least be enough to accomplish the mission. But it was not ideal to have too many participants, since the more people participating meant the ensuing reward would be split in more ways, reducing the amount each individual would end up earning. Thus, the amount of people cooperating had to be perfectly balanced, and would depend on having a good grasp of the difficulty of the quest, and their own strength. Furthermore, because it was still a competitive mission, it was often the case that players partnered with the stronger mercenary groups, forming a temporary collaboration. As such, the smaller mercenary groups might not even be able to complete the task when they attempted to compete, which would only result in them backing out from participating. Thus, even the act of forming up a temporary yet formidable party had a certain profoundness to pick up from. Even we won't be facing them all, there's no guarantee that any temporary collaboration between our enemies would be weaker than us, right? Against such an army, would we not still be in deep trouble? Chapter 374, Splitting up. The mercenary group leaders all chattered and discussed the matter at hand, expressing their disagreement towards young Master Han's idea to split everyone up. This was especially true for the Black Hand mercenary group's leader, Black Forefinger. He was already feeling disgruntled about losing a level back in Linian City, and with how discontented he was towards young Master's elites to begin with, his voice was one of the loudest when he saw the smug look that young Master Han had on. Young Master Han listened to everything silently, not reacting in the least. It was only when everyone had finished coming up with all their criticism that they finally calmed down and began eyeing young Master Han steadily, waiting for his explanation. That was when young Master Han nodded his head and calmly said, "Let us now discuss how to split everyone, and how many there should be in each team now." Everyone exploded into an uproar. It was like everyone had wasted their breath, with young Master Han treating their words as no more than a fart in the wind. Everybody became agitated in that instant, and Black Forefinger had already dashed towards him with the impulse to give him a good thrashing. "Everyone please calm down, don't be rash." Oathless Sword hurriedly came out to mediate the affair. He was now extremely afraid of any disunity from within, since he would instantly be the victim. Once everyone had calmed themselves down, Oathless Sword quickly asked young Master Han, "Brother Han, why don't you explain it in greater detail to us?" Young Master Han swept his gaze across everyone and said simply, "Don't they have to split up their troops as well? If we do that, their target is bound to be Todd, but will they know which team he will end up in?" "We've all thought of that point," Black Forefinger laughed coldly. "But if the opponent is just going to match the number of teams we split up, what's the point of going through the whole process of doing it? May I ask why you would tell our opponent just how many teams we have split up into?" Young Master Han questioned him back. Black Forefinger was stunned for a moment before saying, "Couldn't they tell from a glance? Find a spot where people can't see us and split everyone up into teams before we head off in all directions. We'll hide a team in that place, wait until the enemy's attention has been lured away before we sneak Todd into the city." Luo said suddenly. Young Master Han had a similar plan as well, so he politely nodded his head. "And just where are we gonna find such a place?" Black Forefinger continued to sniff with contempt. But the expression everybody had already changed, with everyone looking towards the same location, more or less agreeing on that dried out river valley beside them. "Looks like there aren't too many idiots after all," young Master Han sighed in relief. Black Forefinger already had enough by this point. Actually, he should already have realized this point himself, but he had been blinded by hatred. All he thought about at the moment was challenging young Master Han's suggestion, accidentally trapping himself in the process and now appearing to be one of the dumber mercenary leaders present. "There's a certain amount of risk that comes with this method, and a certain level of sacrifice might possibly be needed from us all. However, it is still better than the current quagmire we found ourselves in, where we are unable to progress or retreat in any sense." Young Master Han looked towards Oathless Sword after he had said this last line. In the end, Oathless Sword was still the boss in charge, since he was the employer that had hired everyone as temporary muscle. "Let's do it like that, then." Oathless Sword came to a decision very swiftly. "Change of direction, we're heading towards that river valley over there." Oathless Sword gave the order through his guild channel, as the various mercenary group leaders did the same to their members. Even though the players had no idea what this was all about, all of them acted with accordance to the order, making their way over to that river valley a short distance away. Black Forefinger had not given up at this point, quietly muttering to himself, "Could no one see a thing if we hide out there in that river valley? I doubt that. There's plenty of high ground around us. Could there really be no one watching over our every move?" But Black Forefinger finally had nothing else to say when he made his way over to the river valley. It was not so much a river valley as it was a canyon. The two steep cliff sides that formed this valley seemed to have been eroded perfectly, an impressive view the system had created. How are we gonna get down?" Several men felt a little faint just from looking down at the ledge. "Just jump. You're not gonna die from the fall," young Master Han said. There was bound to be some among all these men that had some experience jumping from such a height, and this height was truly something they considered to be safe, who immediately took the lead and jumped down. Some of the other players who were still wavering kept trying to find out just how much damage those players that jumped down had incurred. They asked many times, yet the number they gave back were all different. It was unknown if the damage they took from the fall was a result of their stat distribution or anything related, but at least they were somewhat soothed by the fact that the threat was not that great, so more and more took the plunge. Now that more than half had already leapt off, it was the still dissatisfied Black Forefinger who suddenly realized the problem. "Hold up." He stepped forward to block those who were about to jump. Oathless Sword had also been nearby getting things in order and had not yet jumped down, so Black Forefinger directed his question to him, "Making our way down here might be easy, but what about getting back up?" "There's a place not too far ahead that we can use to get back up," young Master Han casually pointed before saying, "Bro, can you ask a question with a bit more depth?" "Where?" "Why don't I see anything?" Black Forefinger took a step towards the direction young Master Han was pointing, yet he did not see any sort of exit out of the valley, continuing to be suspicious of the plan. "You can go over to take a look. It isn't too far." Young Master Han no longer bothered to humor him after this, and he turned to leap down into the river valley, as well. Many other players overheard this conversation between the two and evidently did not consider Black Forefinger's question to be an issue as each passed him and jumped, treating him as nothing but air. All the players from Yunjuan City gathered within the valley in no time, making it seem somewhat crowded. The issue on how they would go about sorting the teams had already been settled by Oathless Sword as they made their way over after considering young Master Han's input. At the moment, all the relevant members were already notified, and the players headed over to gather according to their coordinates after making the jump. "Everyone take care. We'll see each other in Lori City soon." There was indeed an exit to the valley after following along the walls ahead for a short distance, just as young Master Han had said. The slopes on either side here were not as steep, so climbing up was not a particularly difficult task. All of them made the hike up before heading in different directions. It was almost a guarantee they would meet the enemy, fight, and possibly die. However, as long as prisoner Todd reaches the destination, the system will naturally announce their quest failure, and the enemy is bound to stop the pointless fighting. Thus, everyone should give it their all to drag the fight out. "Deal with things as best as you can," Oathless Sword said in accordance to young Master Han's words, passing his final instructions to everybody. "Take care, see you soon." As each team still had to maintain a certain level of combat strength as well as a balanced job class composition, plenty of friends were not sorted into the same team, so they were now giving their well wishes to one another once Oathless Sword finished his final speech. "Hey, return it to me." At this time, even young Master Han had someone that came forth to have a word for him, though the item they were talking about was entirely unrelated to what everyone was talking about. "How much for it?" Young Master Han said to this person. "I'm not selling it, I still want to play with it." The person that was speaking to young Master Han was Vast Lushness. "Then let me use it for a little while more. I'll return it to you once this quest is over." At this time, Oathless Sword had given the command and everyone had begun to make their way out of the valley. Young Master Han did not bother to find out if Vast Lushness agreed to his proposition either, waving to call his own comrades, "Time for us to leave." Vast Lushness did not chase after him looking for the item either, as the team she was assigned to had also set off. After young Master Han made his way over to rejoin the others, he took out a spyglass from his dimensional pocket and looked all around him as he said, "What a useful item. That thing. I honestly have no idea how that lady acquired it." The information King Brother Assist had once more came upon something he had no idea about, making him feel as pained as if there were 100 pairs of claws scratching his heart. "Why don't you just ask her?" Royal Godcall grumbled. "She probably won't say a word about it." Brother Assist had spent plenty of hours digging for information, so he was well aware how people acted when it came to such matters. Asking the person themselves about secret items like this would only be inviting trouble. In his eyes, this spyglass could be considered a secret item, for it was even stronger than the eagle eye passive skills archers had. Brother Assist knew how valuable that precious item was just from that envious look Royal Godcall had given Brother Assist's vast experience with information gathering. He was certain that there was no way anyone would easily reveal the origin of such an item. "Maybe she won't tell you a thing, but you could always ask Miles." War Without Wounds smiled lewdly. "Isn't he very close to that lady? Why isn't Miles making his way over?" Sword Demon asked simply. "Who knows where that guy ran off to?" Young Master Han replied back with a simple sentence. "It would be great if Miles was here. I'm depressed now that we got this trash tagging along." Royal Godcall said this, channeling as much of his contempt as he could in that one glance to the side. Drifting was standing at his side with an honest smile, seemingly ignoring Royal Godcall's blatant verbal attack as he sincerely said, "It is truly quite regretfully Miles isn't here. This team could really use that matured and balanced temperance of his." "Damn twerp, what did you say? Are you trying to pick a fight?" Royal Godcall had a really troubled time now that his real self had been exposed by this Vermo. He especially hated any sort of words that implied he was a child, which was clearly what Drifting meant with his words. "Hey, what did I say?" Yet this person refused to keep bickering with the Royal Godcall, even going so far as to feign cluelessness over what he said. "Stop your quarreling. We've got a very important responsibility." Young Master Han had stopped playing with the spyglass now and began to act all serious once he stowed it. "With this burden with us, I feel our future's uncertain," Royal Godcall said darkly. "Hee." Drifting merely chuckled, no longer saying another word. "They're all down in the valley. They are now splitting up." Deck's small squad led by Southern Lone Blade had been keeping an eye on the players from Yunjuan City all this while. This squad had a huge headache now that they saw what the questers were doing. They only had 7 men in this squad altogether, so there was no way they could keep an eye on all the teams those players had split into. As such, they had no way of knowing just which team or direction did Gufei would end up going. "Hey, that's not a bad solution," Southern Lone Blade suddenly chuckled. "What?" his comrades asked him. "These teams running all over the map now are sure to be diversions. I dare say that the target they are protecting is still in that river valley. They left a small team in there, hoping to send their target into the city by going along that canyon as soon as they can. Wouldn't the battle end once they accomplish the quest?" Southern Lone Blade said. "Oh, that would really be a smart move," his comrades realized. "And since I would be the crucial team, they are bound to be made up of the top experts they have. Thus, that video Mage is sure to be among them." The 7 men continued to infer. "That's right. That is exactly why we are heading down the valley, as well." Southern Lone Blade waved his arm as the 7 men popped out from behind that rocky outcrop and dashed towards the valley. Chapter 375, Quietly making a fortune. The players from Yunjuan City that climbed out of the valley ran out in the directions they were assigned. Adding together the remaining members of Traversing 4Cs and the other players from the mercenary groups, they numbered about 700, barely half what they had originally set forth from Yunjuan City with. At the moment, they were split up into 4 parties of approximately 200, heading in every direction once they cleared the river valley. Of course, they did not run perfectly in the 4 cardinal directions, as everybody was still advancing forward. It was just that each party were clearly splitting from one another, so it was no longer possible to gather them together again, meaning the enemy would also have to split up their men to stop them. Following Oathless Sword's orders, everybody hiked up the valley and began to vigilantly look around their surroundings, especially those archers who had taken in the situation around the map. They could easily spot the changes around them this time. In the short time they had all gone down the river valley, plenty of the players who had been scattered all over the map grinding on the monsters seemed to have begun to gather into clusters, and the direction they were headed was clearly towards the valley. However, all the players from Yunjuan City had once more appeared not long after they set out towards the valley. The enemy had no idea how to react the moment they saw that the players from Yunjuan City had split themselves into 4 parties. These Yunjuan City players disregarded them entirely as they headed in the directions they had been assigned to. Since their enemy's movement was already made clear by this point, the players from Yunjuan City were naturally able to do their utmost to avoid taking the fight head-on. The longer and further they could lure these enemies away from prisoner Todd, the better. His safety was the top priority. Everything would surely end as long as he could safely reach the prison. That was the directive for this engagement, clarified and made apparent in the clearest manner. When all was said and done, their opponent this time around was a coalition of mercenaries that had been provisionally assembled for this mission. Their cohesiveness was a joke, so it was bound to take quite some time for them to gather themselves when met with a situation that required them to arrange an entirely new plan, even if they were decisive about it. Seeing Yunjuan City's 4 parties scatter across the air and land, these people were still unable to respond and act accordingly. Southern Lone Blade shook his head when he saw this. Look at them. Do they lack even an unified commander for this mobilization? But just as he said this, those players finally made a move of their own. It was just as young Master Han had expected. These men had no choice but to split up their troops as well, looking to intercept all 4 parties that were fleeing the area. In that moment of bedlam, it was hard to tell if either party held numerical superiority over the other. Well, at least their response wasn't too slow. Southern Lone Blade sighed in relief. Why are you so concerned over this? The priest from his squad asked. There was no obvious reduction in number to the amount of players from Yunjuan City coming out from the river valley, so that means there's only a handful of them left within the valley itself. The less there are, the more outstanding those people will be. Do you know the elites that count themselves among the ranks? Southern Lone Blade said. Who else would there be, aside from that video mage? Someone asked. The dynamic addict duo. War Without Wounds. Brother Assist. Southern Lone Blade gave a slight pause after each name, the severe expression etched upon his face lending gravitas to the situation. The comrades he had brought along with each Windigate when they heard the names. No way! Someone shouted, all those experts are all from Yunjuan City? That's right, I even met those guys when they first arrived at Linshui City, Southern Lone Blade said. Oh, so those were the people your friend brought you to meet? That's right, Brother Assist is my friend, Southern Lone Blade said. All those guys are renowned in the MMO community. But now that they are in a full immersion setting like this VMO, it is still up for debate how good they truly are. If they were truly so magnificent, why aren't any of their names found in the ranks of Parallel Worlds 5 unyielding experts? That's why I say, there's no telling if we're no match for them. The thief among Southern Lone Blade's squad was a thick-set man of great physique, who exuded much pride as he said this. Southern Lone Blade smiled as he said, it is indeed difficult to tell who's the stronger individual. But we've only got a single target today, so it is best if we avoid having any conflict with these experts. Let us obtain the biggest profit with the lowest expenditure, that's how you do business. So, what do you intend to do? That thief asked. Hopefully there's another expert from Lori City that can see through this plan of theirs. In that case, we'll be able to watch closely from afar as the men from Lori City take the first strike. Even if they are able to take care of all the experts from Lori City, it is bound to take quite a toll on them. That would be the opportunity for us to attack. Southern Lone Blade trailed off. This is indeed consistent with your style. The other 6 comrades he brought along had worked with Southern Lone Blade for quite a long time, and sighed with admiration at this plan of his. Although the 7 men had been talking all this while, they had not stopped pushing forward. However, not a single one of them leapt into the river valley, merely walking along the ledge cautiously while they took in the situation across the map, checking again and again if they were nearing the people who were still within the valley. Across the map, both parties had split into 4 parties and these 8 parties played a short game of cops and robbers. And now, It looked as if the two parties were finally about to clash for the first time. This clash was necessary. After all, the responsibility of the Yeonju-on City players was to escort prisoner Todd into the city, hiding and evading pursuit outside the city without any intent of making it into Lori City would obviously betray their goal of buying time. Thus, in order to avoid quest failure, it was imperative for them to make an aggressive rush towards the city. The first to engage with the enemy was the party led by Guzio Shang. Guzio Shang was not just a mercenary group leader, but a guild leader as well. Given how she was often the beauty Oath's sword would fawn over, it was not particularly hard to understand why she would be the one shouldering a heavy responsibility like this. This was a lady who was proficient in taking command of group PvP. This woman remained undaunted despite facing such a huge task, firmly taking command of her troops with unwavering expertise. This company of men from Yeonju-on City may have been a motley crew of players in the beginning, but after spending several days on this expedition, their experience wandering from city to city as foreigners, journeying and fighting together, spending what downtime they had together over a drink or two had built a level of familiarity that was that bit better than any other temporary gathering of players of varying allegiances. This was most evident in how accustomed they were to taking orders from a unified command. Even if they did not agree with how Guzio Shang had arranged the troops, each of them would at the very least follow the orders they were given, giving them that edge over the patchwork army rushing towards them right now. The players they were facing did not seem to number any more than those on Yeonju-on City's side, and their formation looked to be orderly, but the arrangements they used had rather obvious gaps between them. The reason was entirely due to the fact the players were unfamiliar with one another. Now that a battle was about to break out, every man would freely attack how they deemed fit, since they did not even have a commander in charge. It was clear which side held the advantage in this fight, as the players from Lori City were slaughtered like the rudderless army they were, the front two rows collapsing in the first exchange of fire alone. That was the point when the players from Lori City realized they were not facing mere pushovers. They were in a pinch. So players began to step out voluntarily and took charge, commanding everyone. Most players participated in both mercenary and guild activities. It was rare to find players who only did just one. Thus, quite a number of players that had participated in mercenary groups had experience waging large-scale group PvP battles like this. Now that they had someone taking charge of overall command, the situation was no longer as dire as when they first clashed. After all, those that joined in the coalition for this huge mission were the top players of Lori City, not any worse than those found in Yeonju-on City. It was almost impossible to tell which side held the upper hand at the moment. On Yeonju-on City's side, although they appeared to be rushing aggressively forward, deep down they were actually putting their survival foremost. Seeing that the enemy had managed to calm down and stand their ground, they instantly began to focus on their own defense. The players from Lori City abruptly felt as if they had become a more formidable force. The one attack they mounted seemed to have immediately muted their enemy's own assault, and their fighting spirit rose even as they began to call for blood. There were even cries of "Give us what we want and we'll show you mercy." Naturally, what they meant was "Hand over Todd and we'll spare your lives." The goal for Yeonju-on City's players was to hide Todd's position, so they could not let the enemy find out that Todd was not within their formation. The best method to achieve this was to sow uncertainty in them. So when the enemy shouted such words, Guzio Shang instantly shouted back her response, "Let's see if the sword in my hand agrees." She raised her arm up with that roar as she released the cape she had on. The cape took to the wind and flew right into someone's face, and she used that opening to swipe both her swords through and slay that man. "Whoa, that woman's despicable!" the enemy yelled madly, even as the battle between both sides crescendoed. Leaders of different personality would often decide the temperament the troops would take in battle. The way Guzio Shang led her men into battle head-on was a mirror image to the straightforwardness of that lady. On another side of the battlefield, the men Black Forefinger were in charge of were quickly irked by his method of engaging the enemy. "Please, my fellow brothers, I wonder if there's anything I could help you with." Black Forefinger had a big smile on his face, warmly greeting the enemy that came running straight towards him. As the saying went, there was no reason to raise a hand against a man who owned up to his mistake. The enemy did not feel too good attacking given the action Black Forefinger had taken. They quickly stopped, With a representative coming forth to greet the players from Yunjuan City with the line people would often give when two parties that picked up a competitive quest would meet. Sorry, we're doing a competitive quest. Oh, what's the content of your mission? Assassinate Todd. His opponent was honest. Todd's not among us. Black Forefinger matched this man in terms of honesty. When that man heard his honest words, he instead smiled. Is that so? Do you mind letting us have a look then? Haha, he's really not with us. Do you not believe us, bro? Black Forefinger tried to laugh the matter off. A lie that could be true, meant it could truly be a lie. This was a military strategy depicted in the War of the Three Kingdoms that Black Forefinger had played perfectly. Oathless Sword had specifically instructed the parties to make the enemy suspect that prisoner Todd could be within their midst. Black Forefinger was a man with quite a few tricks up his sleeves. His method of stalling for time involved wasting the enemy's time with pointless banter and words. There were two other troops out there that were each fulfilling their responsibilities and tasks in their own manner. Back in that dried-up river valley, young Master Han and his bunch of elite gamers had finally come across their enemy. The murderous air that pervaded from them was palpable, their target clear from a single glance. Brother Assist and the lot were naturally astonished when they saw that young Master Han's ruse had been seen through. But what they found more surprising was the fact there were not too many players present blocking their way. There's not too many of them, I think we can take them. Royal Godcall did not mince his words, showing his complete disregard for their opponents. Of course. Young Master Han continued Royal Godcall's words. It's rare to find such an opportunity like this. If I was this man I, too, would not tell the rest of the coalition members if I saw through the ruse. I would pretend to be equally clueless, before quietly gathering a few of my own comrades to make our way to this valley and quietly make our fortune. How wonderful that would be. Am I not right, Big Boss Man? Chapter 376, 2-minute battle. The person who came to lead this assault was astonished when he heard what young Master Han had said. He did not expect them to have seen through his intention so cleanly. Indeed, upon seeing the Yunjuan City players head down into the river valley and depart from it in 4 parties, he had instantly guessed that the enemy was creating a diversion to the east and attacking in the west. Superscript 1. Realizing that the 4 parties that were running amok on the map right now were simply to attract people's attention. The team that was truly in charge of escorting prisoner Todd was sure to still be in that valley. He was a citizen of Lori City, so he knew where the dried-up river valley would lead to. He was well aware that it would wind through Lori City, and its location within the city had already been transformed into a trade street. Even though there was an iron gate that barred any players from entering the city just by moving through this valley, the actual city gate itself was mere steps away. Upon climbing out. Advancing through the valley was definitely the safest and efficient option. After making that judgment, he had indeed decided to keep it private, just as young Master Han had said. All the other mercenary group leaders did not seem to suspect such a possibility, so the moment it was decided they would split into 4 parties to hunt for Todd, this man immediately got his own mercenary group members to split into these 4 parties, before quietly taking a dozen or so men and sneakily leading them to this valley, making their way over and lie in wait for their opponent to appear. From the fact their numbers looked to be about as numerous after the enemy re-emerged from the valley, this man was certain that there would not be many people left behind. However, the men he had brought were not exactly exceptionally skilled, but it was the best he could do. His mercenary group only had 100 men, and the dozen men he brought were already conspicuous, especially since the guild leader himself was not even in the fray. There was no telling if someone else might have noticed his disappearance. But for the sake of profit, he had nevertheless decided to go with the riskier option and brought his dozen men over here. And it was as he had guessed. This man was delighted when he saw the enemy had about as many men as he had. But after hearing Royal Godcall's complete disregard for them, and young Master Han perfectly intuiting his intentions, he could not help but feel astonished. Since they had thought of such a step, it was most likely that this man had anticipated the current situation by extension. There was a total of 7 players on the opposing side, and one was dressed in ragged clothes, looking extremely languid. While he was following everyone else without missing a step, he did not react even a little to this blockade of ill intent. Without a doubt, that must be the NPC Todd that they were tasked to escort. At this point, There was no need for any more words as the handful of players from Lori City began to initiate their attack on Todd. This mercenary group leader came to the decision that it was best for them to take the initiative and kill the target. Their mission was to assassinate Todd, anyway. Everything else could be discussed at a later time. Attacking without wasting any time to talk things through, you've got a future ahead of you, kid. Young Master Han praised, but he had stepped in front of Todd ahead of their attack, using his own body to shield their escort. He raised the staff in his hand as a timely heal landed on himself. Sword Demon, War Without Wounds, Royal God Call, and Drifting were veterans with hundreds of battles under their belts. They were already prepared for battle at any time the very moment they came face to face with their enemy. The instant they saw the mercenary leader raise his hand to attack, it was akin to them all hearing a command, and they unleashed their own attacks a step quicker than the enemy. An arrow whistled. Royal God Call's arrow was the quickest on the release. Not even someone with extremely deft skill could dodge a snipe at such a close range. The mage that had tossed out a spell when the mercenary leader ordered was struck right on his temple, disappearing in a flash of white light. Oh no! That mercenary leader thought in despair. The skill of an expert becomes apparent once he or she acts, was an oft-used saying in MMOs. To insta-kill someone with a single shot of his bow, just this powerful display of damage output alone was enough to show his standard when it came to his skill and equipment. But the archer was not yet done with his performance. The leader watched as that archer stow away the bow in his hand and swap it out with another in a single swift motion. Completing the shot cycle, the sound of two arrows piercing through the air could be heard. This time it was a double shot that was unleashed. The two arrows streaked out at a speed far quicker than a double shot from the average archer. Since Royal God Call had targeted another mage to bully, how would that player have a chance to dodge this attack either? By the time those two arrows plunged into his chest consecutively, the mage that had already completed his spellcasting ended up changing the activation word to crap, as he was sent away in another flash of white light. That mercenary leader could not help but tremble when he witnessed this. He had thought it was possible that even though the players escorting Todd would be few in number, they were sure to be elites, yet he never thought they would be so powerful to such an extreme degree. Two of the mages he had brought over were eliminated in the blink of an eye. And that was not the end, either. A warrior on his side had charged forward, looking to hurtle himself right into that priest before transiting into a cyclone to kill off Todd. In the end, the enemy's warrior took a step forward and matched him with a charge of his own. The outcome of that collision was truly a cruel sight to behold. When the verdict between the two warriors came through, the leader turned his head to follow his comrade as the warrior was flung far off into the distance. He turned back to face the enemy's warrior, who was standing firmly, calm and composed, raising his hand while snapping his fingers as he called out without even turning his head, "Heal." In response, young Master Han's magic staff stretched out and poked at War Without Wounds' waist. "Make way, don't block my line of sight. To think they have the time to joke around with one another during battle. Looks like we are nothing more than a snack to them." That mercenary leader was already dejected by this point. Meanwhile, the archers he had on his end, who had originally been prepared to target the enemy mage just like Royal God Call did, failed to fire off a single shot this whole time as they watched the enemy mage cast a spell that left each and every one of them rubbing their eyes in disbelief. Were they seeing this correctly? Why are there suddenly four of that man, each identical to the other? Kage Bunshin no Jutsu? A Naruto fan cried out. Blazing trees of 1,000 Inferno. They saw four identical mages raise their staves simultaneously and unleashed the spell. All of them were at a loss for what to do, while they were certain that the spells cast by the fakes would surely be weaker in terms of damage. The problem was that none of them knew how to differentiate the true mage from the fakes. This lack of information itself made it difficult for them to evade the incoming attack. The four mages before them each pointed in the same direction, covering a huge area that putting them all at risk of being engulfed in the fire. Thus, each one of them began to run for their lives in hopes of escaping the huge area that was soon to be a sea of flames. The mercenary leader had tears streaming down his cheeks as he ran. What sort of situation had he gotten himself in? He was the one that had took the initiative to attack, yet aside from that warrior of his that got sent flying when his charge crashed into the enemy's charge, None of them had even managed to unleash a single attack. The inferno that ensued sprouted forth from the heart of the valley, burning plenty of those players as a result. However, because the mirages of drifting were actually unable to deal any damage, only 2 of their men were unlucky enough to be damaged in this cast. One of them had low HP and had already perished in the flames. The other had more HP, so he was still able to persist and survive despite being caught in the flames. Yet, why would these interlopers be given a chance to catch their breath during a pitched battle? War Without Wounds had already rushed up towards this man like a crashing meteor, swinging his claymore out with both his hands like he was hitting a baseball, and smacked that man back into the flames. Over by the other side, Drifting had already raised his magic staff and called forth a descending wheel of flames to follow up. While the blazing tree of 1,000 inferno would appear without a warning, descending wheel of flames would instantly and ominously create out 4 huge wheels of flame in the sky after the cast was complete. Ignoring the huge psychological stress it created, these men had no choice but to resume running for their lives before they could even stop. That's the real body. The enemy proved themselves to have the skill to be part of the foremost large mercenary groups in Lori City when someone managed to determine which was the real Drifting from the 4 mages. After considering where the 4 blazing trees of 1,000 infernos came from, that thief activated his fleet foot and sprinted out of the AO of the descending wheel of flames as he dove straight towards Drifting. This man did not expect to be ambushed by Sword Demon, who had used stealth when battle begun, and hurried over swiftly to intercept. Flitting past the man, Sword Demon's daggers had already created a gash on his side with a reverse grip, and in the time that thief tried to come to a stop, Sword Demon had already thrown in 2 more lacerations that killed him off outright. Young Master Han and Brother Assist calmly remained where they were, with the former taking care to protect Todd while the latter granted stat buffs to everybody. Brother Assist, do you wanna come up and play for a bit? War Without Wounds called out after his cyclone sent off 2 more players, inviting him to join in the fun. But Brother Assist was a good companion that was always cautious and careful. Even though it was apparent their side held the upper hand, he nevertheless stayed in his position, not at all tempted by War Without Wounds' proposition. The players from Lori City had their attack initiative stolen despite originally holding numeric superiority, and their numbers were even more reduced now that a good number of them had been culled after that wave of deadly assaults. The small party formed by an average mercenary group was no match for this elite team of highly skilled experts before them. After the next wave of attacks ended, the mercenary leader was all that was left of the interlopers, now left standing alone in that river valley. He was the mercenary leader, so he was slightly stronger than his men. After all, the others had already fallen, yet he stubbornly held on all this while. But against this group of apex experts before him, he did not have much confidence in his continued survival. Both his hands gripped his sword tightly, yet he could feel his legs weakening, feeling he could hardly take another step out. These guys are just too fearsome, the man thought to himself. Only 2 minutes had passed from his first command to attack until now, yet the men he had brought with him had already been slain. Now that it was just him alone, would his own death not take a mere 2 seconds, at most? But what made him all the more pained was the message his comrades had sent after dying, telling him how they had each lost an entire level. Just what was going on? Were not the players supposed to only lose a portion of their experience if they died during competitive missions and quests? This mercenary leader had already realized that the risk factor this time had truly been too great. How are we dealing with this guy? Seeing how pallid the man had become, he looked no more like a flickering candle in the wind that a single homing projectile would slay. Royal Godcall did not hurry to do the deed as he turned his head to consult young Master Han on this matter, wondering if he had any sly plan in mind. Let me ask you something. Young Master Han approached that mercenary leader. That man gazed at young Master Han, his expression placid. It was just a Vermo after all. Even though his life was in the clutches of the enemy, he could still respawn upon death. Plenty of players would still have backbone to them and would hardly succumb to beg for their lives. Is the Eternal War mercenary group with you guys? Young Master Han asked. Them? Why would they partner up with us? That man answered. Ah, got it. Young Master Han nodded. How are we dealing with them? Royal Godcall asked again. In most movies, Asking such a question would often lead to the main character letting the victim go as a show of nobility. Kill him. His buddies are still waiting for him in the spawn point, letting him go now might adversely affect him instead. Young Master Han waved his hand dismissively. Chapter 377, Judging the situation. That man sighed in relief upon hearing what young Master Han had said. He did not bother to resist his fate no longer as he exposed his neck and shut his eyes, awaiting for death. Royal God Call did not relent either, releasing the already prepped homing projectile in his hand. The glowing white arrow homed right into the man, turning him into a beam of light that sent him back to the city in an instant. This group of experts could not help but feel delighted when they saw how expeditiously the battle had ended. War Without Wounds sheathed his claymore back into his dimensional pocket and was about to brag for a bit, but young Master Han was a step ahead of him as he said with a solemnly, "Let's not waste time on words and hurry on our way." To think they were not together with Eternal War mercenary group. Just what's going on? Brother Assist wondered aloud as they continued on. What's so strange about that? Why would a mercenary group like Eternal War that had the ability to suppress a guild lessen themselves to work with others? Young Master Han said plainly. You already expected this? Brother Assist asked. Of course. Young Master Han replied. If Eternal Dominion had seen through our plan and brought his men over. Brother Assist could not help shiver despite the warmth around them. The fact that Eternal War had not collaborated with any other mercenary group meant that if they had been the ones who uncovered their plan, they would have rushed over and barricaded that valley with all their men. Given that his entire mercenary group seemed to have learned Kung Fu, just dealing with a handful of them would have been difficult, let alone the whole lot he had with him. Even though they were all veterans and apex experts when it came to MMOs, they just might have suffered a loss if such a situation occurred. However, young Master Han had instead chuckled. Intelligence and levels are two different matter altogether. I doubt they have the brains to comprehend our plan. Why's that? Brother Assist was confused at his statement. Would any intelligent person send 5 men to block our advance, in an effort to let you guys experience our skill? If they had the time to arrange that, wouldn't it have been better for them to immediately make their way over and finish the quest? Young Master Han snorted with derision when he spoke of the method Eternal Dominion had employed. I wonder what that guy we killed will do now. Brother Assist began to worry. He'll be back, young Master Han said with confidence. Now that he has suffered quite the loss in that exchange with us moments ago, I'm sure he'll bring along the rest of the mercenary groups along the next time. Brother Assist stated. Don't worry about that. He won't do it. Why not? It's precisely because he had suffered such a painful loss that he will not do this. He had planned to swallow the reward for this competitive mission from the start. Now that he has paid such a high price, I have reasons to believe that it would simply fuel his wish to capitalize on this competitive mission himself. We may be powerful, but we are still just 6 men. He'd surely believe that as long as he brought more men the next round, eliminating us 6 experts should be more than achievable. Thus, he's sure to handle this matter only with his own men the next round, young Master Han confidently explained. That makes a lot of sense, Brother Assist nodded. And more importantly, the fact that he intended to take the reward all for himself is sure to be something he could not share with his fellow buddies in the coalition, young Master Han added. But how would the others know about what he did before? War Without Wounds had been listening the whole time when he interjected. He won't be dumb enough to tell them that he fought with us prior, which was why he went searching for them. Young Master Han stared at War Without Wounds. He won't be dumb enough to say it, but those friends he brings along from the coalition, are you gonna be dumb enough to not tell them this? War Without Wounds was stunned for a second, recovering enough to say, so he's actually afraid of what we would say. Young Master Han rolled his eyes. Even if we are outsiders, given how sensitive this situation is, especially since they are nothing but a temporarily gathered alliance of men, there just might not be any trust between one another to speak of. In that case, that means that guy is really in an awkward position right now. Brother Assist said. Things were bound to end poorly for wise guys like him. He wouldn't be in this much trouble had he already informed everyone of his discovery. Young Master Han commented coldly. So, what should we do now? Honestly, None of them were truly worried about that man's situation. They had only been analyzing his plight so as to take the appropriate action. Now that he has an understanding of the strength we possess, we are sure to have difficulty dealing with the reinforcements the next time he comes. Thus, I suggest we change our route, young Master Han said. Who are we changing it? Royal Godcall was a little touchy when he heard the route was changing, afraid that he might get lost in the process. This river valley branches off somewhere ahead of us. One would lead directly to Lori City, while the other would bring us to a dead end. We are taking the latter. Young Master Han took out that spyglass from his dimensional pocket and looked ahead to where they were going. It's not too far now, let's quicken our pace. It's inauspicious to walk towards a dead end. War Without Wounds grumbled. Then you can stay where you are. Let's see if you will be the one dying first, or us, young Master Han replied. War Without Wounds was speechless, taking the lead as he took big strides forward. Everything is really in the palm of your hands. Brother Assist sighed in awe. Young Master Han laughed, but he did not say another word as he matched the pace War Without Wounds had set. This brother here is a talent. Drifting commended after hearing the careful analysis young Master Han had given them. As this team continued to sally forth to their new destination, they shortly found themselves at the fork young Master Han had mentioned. Young Master Han pointed as everyone headed to the left and maintained their pace onwards. Behind them, Southern Lone Blade and his squad of men had been walking along the ridge of the valley for quite some time, yet they had yet to find any traces of their targets. In terms of movement speed, both parties were composed of different job classes, so their movement speed as a group was about the same, which made it all the more difficult to chase from behind. Southern Lone Blade figured that their target was bound to encounter their enemies along the way and expend some time taking them down, and was confident that they would be able to catch up due to such interruptions. He did not expect to not see even a shadow of them despite having walked for some time. Perhaps they did not leave anyone in the valley? The mage in the squad of 7 was doubting Southern Lone Blade's analysis. They've left. The archer called Glue extended his hand and pointed. Look, there are tracks of people walking by the river valley. The others did not have eagle eye, so they could not see the tracks he mentioned. Southern Lone Blade waved his arm as everyone followed suit and jumped down into the valley. The ground within the valley was not filled with visible tracks, but Glue casually pointed to a few places and everyone could make out footprints left by others. Someone must have passed by recently. The mage squatted down and said this only after carefully examining the footprint, certain that it was not an imprint made by the system. The system would regularly refresh things like footprints and the ilk, so the fact that it was still visible meant someone must have passed by not too long ago. Have they not met the enemy yet? Southern Lone Blade was skeptical. He felt that if their targets had encountered enemies, there was no way they would have yet to see even a lick of their shadows. Everybody turned to look at Southern Lone Blade. If their target had not met any enemies en route, their plan to capitalize on picking them off after a battle would fall through. Let's keep on going forward and take a look. All conversation will be done across the mercenary channel from here onwards. Southern Lone Blade said. He was worried that the enemy would discover their presence if they heard them talking while nearby. They nodded their heads in unison, continuing their way along the valley gingerly. The dried-up river meandered, so they were unable to see everything ahead of them in one go. All along the way, the 7 men saw no one at the limits of their vision, making sure to take cover and peek ahead whenever they came across any sharp turn. They continued to trail after their target, yet never caught sight of them. Even Southern Lone Blade himself began to doubt his own analysis, when their mage suddenly sent a message on the channel. Come over and take a look. What's the matter? Everybody was using the channel to speak, but the expressions they had were livid as they exchanged glances with one another. The river valley was eerily quiet, creating quite a strange atmosphere. Somebody exchanged blows over here. The mage was once more looking at the muddy ground. Southern Lone Blade came by and patted him on his back, gesturing him to continue. This circle here. The mage fired off another message, pointing awkwardly even as he continued. This is the blast mark of a descending wheel of flames. Is that so? The other 6 men furrowed their brows, as none of them could tell the difference. Trust my analysis. The mage was extremely confident of himself, Parallel World is very particular when it comes to details like this. Not only can I tell this is the mark left by a descending wheel of flames, but I can tell that the damage output this mage had is very high. So it really is the video mage? Someone muttered. Yup, it looks like we are on the right track. Southern Lone Blade grabbed a handful of the muddy sand, yet he could not tell that it had been bombarded by a descending wheel of flames. Was there a scorched smell? He thought of this, but he resisted the urge to take a whiff of it in front of everyone, standing up and patting the mage. Singed Clothes sure lives up to his name as an expert when it comes to fire spells. HMPH. To think there are only two paths of advancement for mages, lightning affinity, and water affinity. What nonsense for the game company to actually abandon the fire affinity like this. That mage's full name was called Flame Singed Clothes. He was a die-hard fan of fire spells, and was extremely resentful towards the design for mages to originally start with fire spells that become either lightning or water after advancement. Look at that rock. The thief called the rest of them over to his side. Everybody hurried over as the thief fingered the slash mark left on that rock. This looks like a mark left by someone's cyclone, right? Southern Lone Blade was a warrior himself, so nationally he was adept at the job class. He came over and examined it closely, yet he did not dare to make the same conclusion. However, when he lowered his head closer, he saw the rock debris that littered the ground. Picking it up to take a closer look, he nodded his head. No matter what skill was used to create that mark, it most certainly must have been done not too long ago. So that means they've already crossed swords with the enemy? Someone said. And they've already eliminated them, as well. Another added. Isn't that perhaps a little too fast? And we've already been hurrying as fast as we could, too. Southern Lone Blade began to calculate the distance between the two. Considering that we heard nothing of this battle that occurred, they must have taken no more than 3 minutes to take care of the enemy. Everyone quietly considered this new information. If this was a 1v1 duel, 3 minutes to obtain a victory would be considered slow. But if it was a group PvP, with a proper job class composition on both parties that had priests healing and players supporting one another, ending the entire battle within 3 minutes meant it must have been an overwhelming massacre on one end. The enemy must have barely been able to put up any sort of resistance before they died. They truly are experts indeed, Glue sighed in awe. Or perhaps the enemy was too weak? The thief was still unconvinced. There's no point in wasting time talking. Let's just carry on the chase. Even though the team was victorious, their plan has essentially been exposed, so the mercenary groups from Lori City are sure to gather more men and try again. Our plan is not yet obsolete, boys. Southern Lone Blade declared. Chapter 378, Fork. At this time, the dozen or so mercenaries who had died from the clash with young Master Han's team were already gathered within the walls of Lori City. Their expression was pained as they looked towards their mercenary leader. We can't just die for nothing. These men indeed refused to give up until all hope it was truly lost. They may be extremely powerful, but they are still just 6 men. Let's give them a good show. Call the guys from our guild. Someone suggested after a short pause. Yes. Their leader nodded. How's the fight over by their end? They are still at loggerheads with one another, no one else seems to have realized anything yet, another replied. But of course, those guys there are surely fighting to stall for time. HMPH, then let's leave them to keep playing with themselves. Quick, gather our men, those whom we can trust. The mercenary group leader ordered. Hence, his underlings instantly got to work, each of them contacting a good friend of theirs within the guild. Most MMO players valued loyalty, so the moment they heard their friend was in trouble, plenty righteously threw in their lot in a show of integrity, often coming to their friend's aid without even asking further questions about the matter. This single call to arms instantly brought forth plenty of comrades to their cause, increasing their numbers to somewhere over 50. What's the matter? Aren't you guys doing a mercenary mission? Someone from the newly gathered lot of players asked. Yeah, it's a mission, but the opponent this time is strong. We need help from everyone gathered here. We will surely not forget your help once the matter is resolved. What's a favor between friends? Come, lead us to them. The throng of players quickly gathered up and set forth valiantly. The mercenary leader who had just been painfully schooled was extremely confident this time. No matter how strong their enemies were, Would they be able to fight 1v10? He strongly doubted they were that vicious. Leaving the city, that throng of players quickly made their way down to the river valley, marching forward swiftly, ready to give young Master Han and the rest a painfully warm welcome. On the other side of the valley, Southern Lone Blade and his squad of 7 men were also hurrying onwards, not wanting to miss their opportunity to profit from other people's efforts. After chasing for a short while, the 7 men abruptly found themselves standing before the fork in that valley. They were instantly stunned by this development, uncertain which way they should be taking to carry on the chase. Why would there be a fork here? Glue grumbled to himself. This could be considered his dereliction of duty, as he was tasked with the scouting duty, being the only player that possessed an archer's eagle eye. It was his fault that for not noticing there was a fork in the river valley now that they were on the hunt for their target. This isn't your fault, Southern Lone Blade consoled him. This area is most probably beyond the scope of your eagle eye. Where do the paths go? Which one did they choose? Everyone, check around to see if there's any footprints. Southern Lone Blade cried out. The squad immediately split themselves into 2 and each searched around for any traces of players passing by. Soon, that burly thief made a discovery over by the left branch and quickly called the others over. Everyone ran over and saw a distinct muddy track. Any discoveries on the other side? Southern Lone Blade was still not convinced, so he asked the 3 others who went searching at the right branch. Nope. The 3 replied. The right is the way to Lori City, yet they instead went left. Southern Lone Blade knitted his eyebrows. How do you know? Have you been here before? His companions were all astonished. But according to what they knew, Southern Lone Blade had never once stepped a foot in Lori City. No, but I just found that out from a friend I have in Lori City, Southern Lone Blade replied. Where does the left lead to? Someone asked. A dead end, Southern Lone Blade replied. Could it be that they had no idea which way to go, and chose the wrong route? Another guessed. No, Southern Lone Blade shook his head. The right goes straight to Lori City, so anyone from Lori City would block their way. Had they taken that path, they must have intentionally taken the left branch of the river valley so as to avoid that blockade. But that means they would be further away from the city, someone said. Wouldn't the risk of making such a move be too great? Not at all. The terrain over here is like this. Southern Lone Blade squatted down and began drawing out a reverse letter on the ground, lifting his head over to the rest of his men. Get it? So there's still a path that connects the left and right branches up ahead. Their decision is probably to first take the left branching path, calculate the approximate time it would take for the enemy to pass to the right side before taking that connecting path back to the right. This places them right behind the enemies from Lori City that should be pursuing them, allowing them to swagger right into the city safely. Flame-cinched clothes already understood their plan. Southern Lone Blade nodded his head. The enemy seems to be rather familiar with the terrain here. So what's our recourse? We head to the right, Southern Lone Blade said. The right? A man was confused. Doing so will allow us to encounter those men from Lori City, therefore we can naturally tell them that we've not met anyone else along the way. Southern Lone Blade smirked. And so, they would naturally think of this connecting path and they would all hurry to the left. All we need to do at that point is follow behind them and continue to wait for the opportunity to swoop in. We could even cooperate with them, tell them that we have a grudge against that video mage and ask them to leave him to us. Ha ha ha. The men each took turns to elaborate on the plan, helping Southern Lone Blade to complete his plan as they confidently made their way over to the right branch of the fork. It was exactly as Southern Lone Blade had expected. As the 7 of them continued on their way forward, they passed by and saw the connecting path between the left and right branches of the fork. Just a few steps after that, they could already see a throng of players in the distance rushing over towards them. Hey, it seems they must have taken a huge loss just now, which is why they are sending so many men over this time, Southern Lone Blade whistled. Look at how many people they have. We would really have busied ourselves over nothing if they instantly vanquished those guys in one go. Flame-cinched clothes said. Looks like we have to talk to them for a bit. Everyone, ensure we share the same standpoint, get them to leave the video mage to us, the 7 discussed even as they advanced forward, acting nonchalant. The pace of the throng of players coming towards them was hurried, each step nearing by the second. Southern Lone Blade wondered just how he was going to start the conversation when he suddenly heard the sound of arrows whizzing through the air as keen arrows flew straight towards their faces. Southern Lone Blade had quite a shock as he swiftly leveled his shield in front of him. The arrows rang when they made contact with the shield as flame-singed clothes next to him paled. The target of those arrows had been him, but fortunately he was beside the experienced Southern Lone Blade, whose quick reaction protected the two with a quick lift of his shield. Otherwise, the consequences of having to take those two snipes with the little HP he had would have been disastrous. While flame-singed clothes managed to keep his life, the man on his other side had squawked and disappeared in a beam of white light. Both parties had quite a huge distance between them, so they were not too clear in determining the job class of their targets. The enemy must have randomly picked two targets to concentrate their attack on. Southern Lone Blade may have saved flame-singed clothes, but the other man took every single arrow shot hurtling towards him. Although they had a priest beside them, he was entirely unprepared for the attack and it was already too late for him to save him with a wave of his magic staff by the time he reacted. The knight in their 7-man squad was the first to lose his life. Heal! Southern Lone Blade bellowed out. His shield may have increased his defense by many times, but it was not a complete defense. He might still be able to stand after taking the blow from 5 snipes, but he had lost a significant chunk of his HP, which required immediate assistance from the priest. The job class in the squad lacked a fighter, but they had 2 priests with them, allowing them to quickly recover lost HP with the 2 of them working together. At the same time, their thief had quickly activated his stealth, leaving just 4 other players standing in a row behind Southern Lone Blade. Holding his shield in front, the priests continuously bestowed their heal from behind. The second round of attacks from the enemy had already arrived, but it was no longer the strongest attack they had this time around. Southern Lone Blade protected himself with the shield, surviving this wave of attacks with the priests behind supporting him. What's going on? Several of them were panicking. The sudden attack they had sent without rhyme or reason towards them was far too alarming. Retreat! Southern Lone Blade shouted to the men behind him. Snipe had a 45-second cooldown. Southern Lone Blade had no idea if he could still hold on like this if the enemy fired their snipes together once they had it ready. The 6 men tacitly aligned themselves in a row and backed away unhurriedly, because there was no way for them to quickly step back when suppressed like this. The enemy archers strode forward boldly as each rapidly fired their arrows in quick draw with marksman-like efficiency. Southern Lone Blade's shield rang continuously as their arrows peppered against it. Nevertheless, this cover he provided was only temporary. What more could Southern Lone Blade do once these archers slowly edged to the side and got an angle on his 4 comrades behind him? The last man of those 4 behind him was the archer Glue, who was the first to become exposed to the enemy fire. Naturally he did not simply wait for death to take him as he grit his teeth and began running out in a serpentine motion. "I'll fight you guys to the death!" Glue roared as he dodged the incoming arrows, returning fire with his own bow. The first shot he fired off was a snipe, staggering an enemy archer with an arrow that showed his attack power to be no slouch either, following that with a double shot right after. However, the enemy also had plenty of priests on their side. Seeing one of their compatriots got damaged, they instantly began their triage. Glue's attack may have been sequentially activated, yet it was not quick enough to kill off that archer. The enemy archers had all turned their targets to him, as every one of them fired off a homing projectile towards Glue. "God damn it!" Glue cursed as he stubbornly returned fire. The 10 glowing white arrows homed in on his body, enveloping him in an even greater white light as he transformed into a flash of light himself. It was a truly tragic sight. The archers changed their target back towards Southern Lone Blade as they continued their ranged assault, while the mages in this throng of players had managed to enter their casting range as well. Each of them began to cast their AO spells. The ground suddenly radiated red as towering flames erupted from the ground, looking as if it was spurting up towards the sky, cutting horizontally across the entire valley. Southern Lone Blade and his men recognized this as the fire spell that Flame-Singed Clothes had in his arsenal, Palatial Balefire, but the enemy had never seen this spell before, so none of them dared to get near it. "Run!" Flame-Singed Clothes took this opportunity to call out to everyone. The casting time for this spell was rather slow, but Glue's sacrifice had bought him enough time to safely unleash it. These men all turned to run, but the enemy archers and mages had not given up, as they continued to fire and cast at their squad. Southern Lone Blade scrambled to provide cover for everyone with his shield, but he was unable to completely take care of his scattered men in his panic, losing one of his priests in the process. "Take that turn ahead!" Southern Lone Blade yelled, indicating the path ahead that was the dried-up riverway that connected the branches of the fork. Flame-Singed Clothes was the first to dive in as Southern Lone Blade and the other priest followed closely behind. "Where's Blackwater?" Flame-Singed Clothes shouted. Blackwater was the IGN of that burly thief. "He has stealth, so he should be able to escape by himself," Southern Lone Blade answered. The three men had not stopped running even for a moment. "Just what the heck is going on? Did those guys mistake us for someone else?" Flame-Singed Clothes yelled. "Mistake us for someone else?" Southern Lone Blade instantly felt his heart tremble. Chapter 379, Mistaken for someone else. Mistaken us for someone else. Southern Lone Blade repeated those 5 words in his heart when he suddenly stopped running. "What's the matter? Quick run!" Flame-Singed Clothes was flustered. "There's no need to run anymore. How are we getting away at any rate?" All that was left was Southern Lone Blade, Flame-Singed Clothes and the other priest. None of them were job classes with high movement speed, so as long as the enemy sent their archers and thieves to give chase, they would easily catch up to them. The time Flame-Singed Clothes' palatial balefire had earned for them were nothing more than self-consolation. "Then let's have it out with them." Flame-Singed Clothes rolled up his sleeves and stared at the turnoff the enemy would have to take, ready to bombard anyone that appeared with his arsenal of spells. "Don't be so hasty." Southern Lone Blade reached out to lower the magic staff he was raising. "Just what's up with you?" Flame-Singed Clothes was confused. "They must have mistaken us for someone else," Southern Lone Blade said. "What?" The dynamic addict duo also chose a priest and thief job class respectively. Brother assists a knight, while RGC's an archer. WWW is naturally a warrior, and if you include the video mage, their group composition is exactly like ours. And since they are escorting the target, the head count for their team happened to be 7 as well. When those guys saw the 7 us together, they must have began their attack without checking our identity. Southern Lone Blade evaluated. Flame-Singed Clothes felt that was a logical conclusion as well when he heard this. The archers had all opened fire the first chance they got when both parties were meters apart. While they would have been able to make out others if they were familiar faces, but their targets this time were strangers, and they most likely had mistaken them for their targets the moment they saw the head count matched. Since this river valley did not spawn a single monster for players to grind, nor would any quest NPCs appear here, players from Lori City who took this route were usually couples who were looking to find some alone time. It would not make sense for 7 players to come frolicking together, so when the enemy saw this group of 7 coming towards them, why would they not think they were the same players they had clashed with from Yeonju-on City at first glance? After Flame-Singed Clothes made sense of all this, he slowly lowered the magic staff in his hand and asked, "So what do we do now? Do we go ahead and explain ourselves? What's there to explain? Let's just meet them face to face to sort this out." Southern Lone Blade sighed as he began to make his way back. The archers had already made their way to the mouth of this fork and fired an arrow the moment they saw the 3 of them. Southern Lone Blade was already prepared for this, so he raised his shield to block the shot before shouting loudly, "Wait a minute. Have you guys mistaken us for someone else?" The enemy archers paused for a good moment as their mercenary leader rushed over. The moment he saw the faces of the 3 men they had been chasing, he instantly realized he did not recognize any of them. In fact, he had already suspected something was off the moment the battle began. The formation those 7 men had taken, standing out in a straight line, would make perfect sense if they were all players. But the issue is that there should have been an NPC with them, and that NPC he had caught a glimpse of earlier had only stood stationary like a blockhead when battle began. It would never move as obediently as any of those men did, especially going as far as to cooperate with the other players to such a degree. Yet, despite the doubts he had, that mercenary leader still cared more for completing the mission. Even if they had made a mistake and erroneously killed someone, they could always talk things over after the deed was done. With such thoughts in mind, he did not bother to say anything more about the matter, either. As for those archers that had taken the initiative to start the battle, None of them recognized any of the targets. They had simply began their attack on first glance without even waiting for their leader to say the word. And the situation at the moment really was a case of mistaken identity. However, that mercenary leader did not even feel a shred of guilt, merely asking with bewilderment, "Who are you guys?" He even suspected that these men who had suddenly appeared out of nowhere might be in cahoots with the people they were hunting. Southern Lone Blade, from Linshui City. Southern Lone Blade calmly reported his name, positive that his IGN alone bore quite a bit of weight in parallel world these days, enough to elicit a different reaction from others. It was just as he had expected. His name caused those men to give each other the side eye. That mercenary leader felt he must be having quite the lucky day, to actually meet someone from the renowned 5 unyielding experts during this random kill today. Of course, while the fame attached to the names of the 5 unyielding experts was widespread, it was not to the point where people would grovel at their feet and fawn over them. This was especially true since this mercenary leader had some urgent business he needed to tend to, not really giving a hoot who he was. Nevertheless, hearing that this person was someone of a certain acclaim, he made note to extend his apologies appropriately. "Sorry about that. We're currently on the hunt for another group of 7, and we failed to verify your identities before attacking. I apologize for any offense caused. We have some urgent business to attend to right now. I'll personally make sure to make proper reparations in Linshui City when we are free." With that, he was about to command his men to continue on their way when Southern Lone Blade suddenly shouted, "Are you guys looking for the 7 men from Yunjuan City? What? Have you seen them?" There was nothing else that this mercenary leader was more concerned over. Hearing what Southern Lone Blade had said caused him to spin back to face him so quickly. It was like his movement speed had increased to 1000 in that instant. "We are actually looking for them, as well. We seem to have seen them enter this river valley, but we've not seen them since we made our way over," Southern Lone Blade said. Those men looked at one another for a quick moment. Their reaction to this piece of news was definitely quicker given how familiar they were with the lay of the land. Did they walk the wrong way? Someone voiced suspiciously. However, their mercenary leader was staring solemnly at Southern Lone Blade, wondering if this was a trap. After all, it was really suspicious that another 7 men would appear in this river valley. "What business do you have with them?" That was the only angle the mercenary leader could probe without being too invasive. "Actually, our business is not with the lot, just the mage that they are traveling with." "It's a private matter," Southern Lone Blade said matter-of-factly. "Private matters." That mercenary leader considered those words in his heart. It was evident they were here to take revenge from the tone he heard. If it was anything else, a simple message would be all it took. They obviously bore ill intent, seeing how they were chasing after him with a squad of men. "We could work together, if it's not too troublesome for you guys." "I'm not sure what you guys are up to, but I do hope you'll leave that mage for us to take care of," Southern Lone Blade continued. Collaborating with one of the 5 unyielding experts. Anyone would have been elated at the prospect of having such a powerful assistance if this was any other day, but this mercenary leader was unexpectedly cautious, worried that there could be some sort of sinister scheme involved. Southern Lone Blade had also thought that any average player out there would also be glad to have an expert such as himself lending a hand, yet he did not expect this mercenary leader to have such strong misgivings towards the situation. Seeing the man hesitate, Southern Lone Blade decidedly said, "I have no idea what quest you guys are on, but if you do not wish for us to get in the way of things, then could you please just leave that mage to us? If it suits you guys, that is." "That should not be a problem," the mercenary said, feeling that Southern Lone Blade was most likely in the clear of being a part of any scheme, finally nodding his head to say, "There's no need for that. Let us continue on the trail together. Sorry to be a bother." Then, Southern Lone Blade smiled as he said this, but flame-singed clothes and the priest were not as calm and collected as him. The two of them were still feeling resentful at the fact that these men had blatantly attacked them without any rhyme or reason, incidentally causing the deaths of 3 of their brothers. "Let's discuss that later after the deed is done," Southern Lone Blade said to the 2 over the private channel. Glue and the 2 other men had revived back at Linshui City and were unable to provide any sort of aid, so that meant Southern Lone Blade had even less of a chance to face off with young Master Han and his team directly. He needed external aid if he hoped to accomplish his task. Hence, even though he was also rather frustrated towards these men for foolishly and indiscriminately attacking him and his squad, he had no choice but to bear with it for the moment. With this matter resolved, the thief that Southern Lone Blade had brought along also hurried back to rejoin what was left of the squad. After that mercenary leader confirmed that no one had attempted to climb out of the valley during this period of time, he had also come to the conclusion that the players from Yeonju-on City must have chosen to take the left branch of the fork that led to a dead end. Why would they walk towards that place? Could it be that they did not know the way? The mercenary leader had also begun to suspect something was afoot. Southern Lone Blade had no choice but to tell him his deduction, which the man found to be logical. He continuously cursed their targets from Yeonju-on City for their craftiness, realizing that had it not been for Southern Lone Blade and his men, he might have just been hoodwinked by those guys and sent on a wild goose chase. With that thought in mind, that leader finally felt guilty over killing the 3 men Southern Lone Blade had brought and apologized profusely for his actions. "Boss, we better get going. The fight on top is about to be over," someone reminded them. "You're right. Everyone, let's pick up the pace. Let's split into 2 teams. The first team will cut to the left branch of the fork and make their way backwards, while the other team will continue ahead. We are sure to catch them now that we are coming in from both sides," the mercenary leader ordered, not forgetting to add, "Any thoughts, Brother Southern Blade?" "None at all," Southern Lone Blade nodded, as he chose a team at random and followed along with the remaining 2 players he had left. At this time, the group PvP battle that was happening all across the map outside the river valley was now in full swing as it headed to its climax. The teams from Yeonju-on City prioritized defense while emphasizing keeping their own men healed, not challenging their opponents with any sort of vicious attacks. They made sure to never go beyond their means, so the deaths on either side were very small, and the whole battlefield seemed exceptional tame considering its scale. Nevertheless, it was impossible to sustain such a state for long. As the troops Gu Xiaosheng was leading struggled with the enemy before them, their opponent were suddenly hit by a wave of new reinforcements. Yeonju-on players who had been purposely prioritizing their defense to drag the fight out as long as they could were suddenly earnestly defending for their lives. The reinforcement that came mainly consisted of fighters, handily hurling, tossing and grappling with plenty of players the moment they clashed. The players from Yeonju-on City were all experts with plenty of experience in PvP, yet they were able to exchange no more than 3 rounds with these newcomers. Those who were lucky made it to 5 before finding themselves beaten on the ground. Only those who depended on their movement speed to create distance between themselves and these fighters managed to escape with their lives. After these Yeonju-on City players had fallen to the ground in a blink of an eye, none of the newcomers followed up with a killing blow. All they did was take them down and continue their way towards the next, using both their skills and the in-game skills of the fighter class to bring everyone to the ground. The tide of this battle easily turned as a result, as if it had instantly became a performance for these fighters. Of the 2 parties that were originally fighting, those from Yeonju-on City could not resist this wave of attacks, while the original players from Lori City had no chance to intervene any longer. The commander heading this assault was a mercenary leader of his own mercenary group. He was very unhappy at the situation before him as he turned his head and said, his voice heavy with resentment, "Eternal, aren't you a little too much, coming in like this?" "What?" A man was seated over on a huge boulder cross-legged. He was leaning on the hand propped up on his left leg, crooking his head to the side as he cheerfully replied, "Seeing you guys struggle with this for such a long time, we've decided to come lend you a hand." "You guys are clearly stealing, alright." That man continued to grumble. "When all is said and done, we were the ones who were here first. Even if we are competing, it's gotta be on a first come, first served basis, right? Hey, I truly thank you for all your hard work, everyone. However, now that I'm online, just leave it to us to handle this." Eternal Dominion replied shamelessly. Chapter 380, Speak or be pummeled to death. That commander leading the troops this time around was depressed. Really depressed. But he had no words. There was nothing he could do if Eternal Dominion and his bunch wanted to be unreasonable and snatch this mission from them. The concept of first come, first served was nothing but a beautiful dream in MMOs, where it was the trend to kill steel monsters, experience, and even equipment. No one who gamed to the point where they were a boss of something would be naive enough to fantasize about this eventuality. Even his own comrades would show their contempt at him for thinking like this, so that mercenary leader had said all he did simply to vent his despondence, before cursing Eternal Dominion 180 times in his heart. As for acting on it, there was no way he would do that. He was no match for the Eternal War mercenary group even with all the players that had gathered in his coalition, much less the mere quarter of it he had with him right now. Failing to take down the enemy after such a long time, he would be better off poking his own eyes out if he could not see just how much stronger Eternal Dominion and his men were, now that they were easily pummeling the same enemy down to the ground in such a short time. This mercenary leader brought his comrades to the side and watched the show, wishing he could cheer on Guzio Shang instead. Unfortunately, reality was a cruel mistress. The silent prayers of this mercenary leader did not help the players from Yunjuan City in any shape or form, as they were soon overwhelmed, falling to the ground one by hands of the men from Eternal War. Some were dissatisfied and got up, only to find themselves sent down to the ground shortly. Picking themselves up once more, only to be pummeled down again. The next time they were pounded to the ground, they never got up again. The seismic tosses these fighters did were not for show. The average player was able to survive no more than 4 of these. The players from Yunjuan City were helpless, and they eventually gave up resisting after they discovered that despite how powerful these men were, the members of this mercenary group never once delivered the killing blow. They could easily tell with a single glance if Todd was among them, now that everybody was down on the ground. It was not too bad a decision to preserve their own levels in the end, now that they saw the inevitability of the situation. At this time, it was actually that mercenary leader from before that reacted the quickest. Seeing all the down players with a single sweeping glance, he immediately realized there was no NPC among all these men, so he quickly informed all the other parties. The fight over here was resolved, yet Todd was nowhere to be found. At the same time, he recalled that there was a more urgent bad news he needed to relay to the rest. Eternal Dominion was finally here. The other 3 parties were obviously well aware of the style and strength the Eternal War mercenaries possessed. Having not seen any of them appear from the start, they had been rejoicing over the possibility that these men had not made their rounds in the Hall of Mercenaries today, and thus had not picked up this mission. Upon receiving the message about this group of walking calamities finally appearing, every one of the mercenaries participating in this limitless competitive quest abruptly cursed Eternal Dominion 180 times even as they called for their comrades to hurry, for the wolves were about to come. As such, the coalition of mercenary groups from Lori City experienced a surge of fighting spirit inside. The players from Yunjuan City had also received the message as well, informing them of the appearance of Eternal War mercenary group as well as how Guzio Shang's side had already been summarily beaten. But even if they knew about this, what else could they do? Carry on stalling for time, of course. Back over by Guzio Shang's side, that mercenary leader had hurriedly called for his men to leave for the other battles to aid in the fight after sending out the bad news. The Yunjuan City players were a little crestfallen, wondering why this Eternal War mercenary group was not hurrying to the other locations and get on with their task. Why are they still milling about here? Are they really waiting to make a bridal dress for the other groups? Just as they were mulling over this, they saw Eternal Dominion, famed for being acknowledged as one of the 5 unyielding experts, finally stand up from that boulder. He lightly took a step off from it, walking off the huge rock as if he was merely taking a step down the stairs. The players from Yunjuan City were all dumbfounded, yet this man actually asked a question to a nearby comrade that left everyone watching all the more flabbergasted. "What's the mission?" That player instantly answered respectfully, "They are escorting an NPC named Todd. Our mission is to assassinate that man." Such an attitude was a strange sight for these players from Yunjuan City. This was just a game, even if someone was the mercenary group leader and the rest were just underlings, everyone could all get along as brothers and friends. Yet, this player's tone and attitude towards Eternal Dominion made it apparent he had an entirely different status, which was an exceptionally rare sight to behold. However, Veteran gamers had seen such scenes before. It was very similar to when a company boss brought his employees into the game to do guild or mercenary group activities. Most people would look down upon these sort of players. It was already more than enough to suffer this in real life. Anyone would just be cheapening themselves too much if they continued to make themselves uncomfortable even in-game. Seeing how each and every member of Eternal War was an expert, yet appeared to be so subservient when facing their mercenary leader, everybody could not help but feel disgruntled for these men, even as they asked themselves, could this Eternal Dominion be some big boss that brought a bunch of bodyguards in-game to play with him? However, Eternal Dominion do not look to be too old age-wise. How would such a young man be a boss of any caliber? Instantly, everybody thought Eternal Dominion was most likely a rich playboy, the son of a nouveau riche. Where's Todd? The players from Yunjuan City heard Eternal Dominion asking his bodyguards this question. They split up into 4 parties, so Todd should be in one of the others that are left, a player replied. And that expert you guys mentioned? Eternal Dominion asked once more. Oh, that expert. I believe he must be tasked with protecting Todd, a player guessed. Since Todd was not in this party, it was meaningless for both parties to continue fighting from the perspective of this competitive mission, so all the members of Eternal War ignored the players from Yunjuan City. Some had even picked themselves up from the ground, yet nobody came to beat them down again. That was when Eternal Dominion turned his head and stared at the Yunjuan City player that just got up to his feet. Where's Todd? This player was beating the dirt and dust off his clothes and swept his gaze over to Eternal Dominion with extreme contempt, fearlessly saying, I won't say a word even if you beat me to death. Is that so? Then I'll have to beat you to death. Eternal Dominion said this just as his kick flew out. Any player who was worth their salt could tell that this was the fighter job class skill, swallow drop kick, but when used by one of the 5 unyielding expert Eternal Dominion, that one kick looked to be executed far more quickly and fluidly than anyone else. Nevertheless, this thief's reaction time was not slow either, dodging that blow by turning his body to the side as he gripped the dagger in his hand. He moved in preparation to pounce over. His movement was equally as fearless as her words, ready to put his life on the line so as to at least let this hateful expert put in the necessary effort to earn the kill. But nobody had expected Eternal Dominion's attack delivery would be incomprehensibly swift, throwing out a punch even before that kick of his came crashing down. Because the thief had not expected his opponent would still have a move up his sleeve, he was instantly seeing stars the moment that punch connected. But what made the surrounding players even more annoyed was when thunderous applause abruptly sounded from Eternal Dominion's men, with someone yelling out, "Beautiful! What a wonderful display of blue dragon spitting foam!" Eternal Dominion turned around to smile and express his gratitude for the compliment. The thief saw that the damage he took from the punch he failed to avoid was not anything particularly shocking. To actually shout out praise so loudly, bootlickers! The thief lambasted, before he stooped to thrust with his dagger again. Eternal Dominion unhurriedly turned back to face his opponent once more, his left hand extending out like a claw that shot out to firmly grasp onto that man's wrist. Hot damn! What's with the grabbing? The thief barked even as he felt Eternal Dominion's nails dig deep into his flesh, causing him to quickly retract his hand in response. Before he could say another word, Eternal Dominion's right hand flew out with 2 fingers outstretched, as if he was about to poke this man in the eyes. The man was entirely taken by surprise, forgetting to even dodge or evade this attack. Just as he thought his eyes were about to be poked out, the 5 fingers on Eternal Dominion's right hand all extended into a claw and grasped his face, shoving that thief to the side forcefully. "I think that will do. Do you really want me to beat you to death?" Eternal Dominion asked. That thief's mouth hung agape, unsure of what to say. He had originally thought Eternal Dominion had been depending on his group of highly skilled men to grind to his level, but the short exchange made him realize how far away from the truth he was. Eternal Dominion was just like those men he led, easily dealing with his attacks and similarly avoided the killing blows. However, Eternal Dominion no longer bothered with him as he turned to ask the others, "Anyone willing to tell me where Todd is?" Stunned silence greeted this naive question. Eternal Dominion shook his head helplessly as he said, "It don't hurt to beat someone, and killing people only causes them to lose experience. Nothing about this is lethal. Let's go." With that, He brought his crowd of comrades along to another battle to kill Steel. Gu Xiaosheng and the other players from Yunjuan City who were still alive were all rooted to the ground as they looked at one another. This was an ending that was far from ordinary. According to the arrangements they had before, once the enemy realized they did not have Todd within their party, the players of Yunjuan City were supposed to change to an aggressive approach and attempt to hinder their enemies from leaving to aid the other battles out there. Everyone would only be released from their responsibilities until either Todd died, or they had accomplished their escort mission. But now, the battle was still raging fiercely elsewhere, yet they were standing around without anything to do at the moment. It was truly contrary to what they had intended. The Eternal War mercenary group was truly fearsomely powerful, but the stronger they were, all the more reason they should have tried to stall them, so as to reduce the amount of trouble Eternal War could bring to the others. It was as if Gu Xiaosheng suddenly woke up when she thought of this, leaping to her feet as she called out to everyone, "Why are we letting them get away? Chase after and engage with them." "How are we going to engage?" Each of them had a glum expression on their faces. All of them would be eating dirt after exchanging a few moves. The distance they had in terms of skill was simply too much. Harass them with ranged attacks, get the melee job classes to prevent potential retaliation. Gu Xiaosheng ignored the prevailing sentiment shared by everybody as she ordered them to continue the fight. Everybody had no choice but to adopt the self-sacrificing mentality for the sake of the payoff for the entire group as they stubbornly gave chase, unleashing a wave of attacks once they caught up to their rear. The members of Eternal War easily dodged it. They were annoyed to find Gu Xiaosheng's party harassing them incessantly like this, so someone took the initiative to suggest to Eternal Dominion, "Leave some of us behind to take care of this lot." Eternal Dominion turned his head back to look at the group harassing them and shook his head, "Forget it. Let's run a little faster and they won't be able to keep up any longer." The members of Eternal War was different from the usual players. It was an imperative for them to allocate points towards agility. So once they started earnestly running, most players would be unable to give chase. Take Gu Xiaosheng, for example. She was a warrior, so how could she compete in terms of her movement speed with players who had allocated points to agility? All she could do was stare as Eternal Dominion and his men got further and further away. Since the leader herself was unable to catch up, the archers and thieves in her party were more than happy to pretend to muck about. Soon, they found themselves back in a state where they were left with nothing to do.